Today we're going to learn how to do the basic checkmates. We're going to first do the king and queen checkmate, then we're going to jump into the 2 rooks, then the 1 rook checkmate, which is a little bit harder and more complicated, and then we're going to finish up with 5 easy steps to get the 2 bishop checkmate done. Hello everyone, welcome back. My name is Alex, and let's just get this checkmates going. So the first one we're going to do is the king and queen versus king checkmate. Now, when I get this position, the first thing that I want to do is move my queen a knight distance away from my opponent's king. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to get my queen and I'm going to place my queen on that square, for example. Now, notice that if my queen here was a knight, it will be attacking this king here. Now, why do I say a knight distance away? Well, the reason for that is that notice that this king cannot get closer to my queen. By keeping her a knight distance away, I make sure that this king can never get close enough to my queen to actually capture her. If I go too close, for example, if I take this move back and I go here, well, then this king can just capture my queen. So we don't want to do that. If I keep her a knight distance away, then we make sure that other move is not possible. Now, no matter where our opponents go, we're always going to keep this in mind. Whatever my opponent does here, we're going to always move a knight distance away until we actually push this king to one of the edges of the board in either direction. As you can see right now, we have this king boxed in this square. So we're going to push the king either to this side of the board or to that side of the board. And once that happens, the next step is to bring our king closer in order to provide the checkmates. So let's see how this works. So the king moves, and again here we're going to move our queen a knight distance away. Notice that it's already a knight distance away, but we can actually make this a little bit closer. So we can come here. We're also now a knight distance away, and we're driving this king closer to the edge of the board. Here the king continues to move, and again we're going to move a knight distance away. Notice now we're pushing this king again to one of the corners. The king continues to move, and again we're going to move our queen a knight distance away. And once from this position, once the king reaches one of the edges of the board, it is here that we're going to block this king from escaping. We're going to create a wall, and keep this creating a wall in mind because we're going to use it in future checkmates, especially with the rook. So what do I mean by a wall? Well, notice that this queen is creating here a barrier that this king cannot cross. And now that we have that king trapped down there is when we bring our king closer. So here, black will just move his king. We bring our king closer. Notice that this king has to stay back there, just move back and forth. It cannot escape. So that is all it's going to do while we march our king forward. And once our king reaches the sixth rank, we can go ahead, put our queen in front of our king and provide the checkmate. Let's jump now into the 2 rook checkmate. Now, this checkmate, just like the queen, is very easy, and all you need to do is follow very simple steps. The first step we're going to do is we're going to create that wall. It doesn't matter in this position which rook you use, we're going to create a wall. I'm going to put my rook here, and I'm going to create this wall. Now notice that this king cannot cross this wall. So it can either move lateral or it can go back. So it doesn't matter. Once we've created a wall, of course, this king is going to move. And the next thing we're going to do is that we're going to bring our other rook. And we're going to bring the 2 rooks together because the checkmate that we're going to do goes by a name called the ladder checkmate. And what's going to happen is that the rooks are going to march up the board or down the board, depending on where you're doing the checkmate, in sort of like a ladder motion, supporting each other. So let's see what that looks like. First, I'm going to bring this rook here. Again, cutting off the king. The king is again going to move. And notice how I'm going to bring my 2 rooks together. And something very important, this rook came to this square. It didn't go to this square. If it goes there, then it gets in the way of this rook going there as well, going forward. So we want to keep them together, but not on the same line, not on the same file. So here now the rooks are able to march up the board, sort of like in a ladder motion. Let's see what that looks like. This king goes there. You see the rook gives a check. the rook gives a check, sort of like in a ladder motion. Now, something very important, once the king gets really close to our rook, this rook cannot provide a check, because in this situation, it will not be checkmate, because this king can actually take this rook. So when this happens, we're going to go ahead and bring this rook all the way to the other side. Now, this king is going to come here, and we don't want to give a check here, because then the king can just take it. So in this situation, again, we're going to go all the way to the other side, and now this king has nowhere to go. Once it moves, we're going to provide the last check and checkmate. Okay, let's do now the one rook checkmate. And this one is a little bit more complicated, but if you just follow the guidelines that I'm going to give you, it's going to be super, super simple. All right, when you're confronted with this king and rook versus king, what you need to know is that you need to drive your opponent's king to one of the edges of the board. What are the edges of the board? Well, this one here, this one, or this one. Now we have defined our edges. We need to drive this king to one of those edges with our rook. Unfortunately, the rook cannot do it by itself. It's not like the two rooks where they can work together to do it, or the queen, which if we keep it a knight distance away, it can itself drive the king to the corner. In this situation, we're going to use the rook, but it's going to need the king's help. So the first thing we're going to do, like we do in the other checkmates, is we're going to create a wall. We're going to come here with rook to h4 in this situation, and we're going to create this wall. Now this king cannot longer cross this line. What does that mean? Well, this means that we're no longer going to checkmate the king down here. What this means is that we're going to now either checkmate the king in this edge or that edge, or maybe even in this edge. Let's see. King to e5. And one of the main differences, like I've explained before, between the one rook versus two rooks is that we need to bring our king. So we're going to bring our king closer. And once we reach this position, black is going to have a couple of options. And I'm going to show you what you're going to do in case any of them happen. If the king comes to e5, for example, then all we're going to do is give a lateral check. Notice that once we give this check here, this king cannot cross this line because our king prevents our king from going there. So it is forced to go back. So this is what we want. And once the king goes back, then we've cut off the king yet another line that it cannot cross. That's if the king goes to e5. Now, the king can also try to go to maybe e6. If this happens, then again, we're going to cut off the king with the rook to h5. The king can also go to c5. Well, in case of this, then we're going to go ahead and play rook to d4. And notice now that this king is completely boxed in this little, it's not a square, it's more of a triangle, but it's boxed in there and it cannot escape. So that's exactly what we're going to do every single time. The king gets closer to one side, we're going to corner it and we're going to push it towards that side. So the longest way and the way this king from this position can put up the most fight is to go actually to e6, and we're going to play this move rook to h5. From here, the king moves, and again, we have to bring our king closer. There's no other way. The king and rook need to work together to push this king to one of the edges of the board. Here the king moves, and again, once the kings are in front of each other, the idea here is, like I said before, we're going to give this lateral check. Again, this king cannot come closer. It has to move back. Once it does, we bring our king close again. It keeps moving, and eventually we're going to drive this king to the edge of the board, and we're going to provide the checkmate. Now notice that once we give this lateral check, now there's no more spaces to go to. The king cannot move forward, and unfortunately for him, he cannot step outside the board because, well, that just doesn't happen. All right, so that's the one rook checkmate. Let's now work on the two bishop checkmate, one of my favorite ones to do over the board. For starters, a lot of players think that you might not know how to do it, but it's very simple. It's not like the knight and bishop where you do need some finesse in order to get it done. And as we progress in this course, I will show you that one as well. The first step is going to be to centralize your bishops. So I'm going to go bishop d4, king moves, bishop e4. Notice the reason we centralize the bishops is that we have created this wall here, not a wall, it's more of a triangle that this king can no longer escape from. So it is boxed in this little triangle here. Now, when we get to this position, the king's going to move. The next thing we're going to do, step number 2, is that we need to bring our king to the center of the board as well. So we're going to go ahead, bring our king, and now that our king has made contact with our bishop, the next thing to do, the next step, is to make the triangle smaller. So how do we do this? Well, we're gonna use the bishops, and now notice that we have made the triangle that we created earlier a lot smaller. This king only has these 6 squares here to move to. Once this happens, the next thing that we need to do is use our king in combination with the bishops to drive the king to one of the edges of the board. So that is what we're going to do. We're going to use the king in combination with the bishops to move the king to the edge of the board. Once this happens, once we reach the position that we have here and the king is in the edge, the next step is to bring this king to one of the corners. Now, if you ask me, this corner here is a lot faster to get to, so that's the one I'm going to use to deliver the checkmate. So here you're going to make some moves, and now the king is there, but notice that we cannot give a check to the king. We need to make sure that the king is there and give a check in order for it to be checkmate. So what we're going to do is that we're going to rearrange our pieces a little bit. We're going to bring our bishop back. Now put our king there, and notice now that we will be able to give the 2 bishop checkmates. Guys, these checkmates are very simple. You need to know them. Until you actually prove yourself and doing them over and over again, your opponents are going to keep trying to test you. Once they know you know the checkmates, they'll resign way before you get to this position. I haven't done a checkmate in a very long time, unless it's playing Blitz online where it happens, but in real life, in real tournaments, people resign much earlier than before you give the checkmate, just because they understand that you know this. But until you can prove yourself and show them that you actually do know how to do it, they will continue to try you. So learn them, practice them, and you should be fine going forward. Thank you for watching. As always, stay safe, have a great day, show respect to your opponent. See you on the next video.